joining me as always. And today, my very special guest is Paul Seaton with AgencyFi. Paul, good to see you.
Karl, it's great to be here. Thanks so much for having me on.
Absolutely. I love geeking out with finance people because I am not one. And it is something, like in all seriousness, I take full advantage of interviewing people like yourself on this podcast to learn more. So I hope to get into some of that today. Tell me about AgencyFi though first, and give me the rundown of the company, what you guys do.
AgencyFi, I started in a full-time capacity a little over 2 years ago. We do outsourced accounting and CFO services for digital and creative agencies, generally in the $1 to $10 million annual revenue ballpark. I started this work about 7 years ago. I worked at Deloitte right out of college, and a friend of mine had started an agency in Nashville. He knew I was a CPA and wasn't thrilled with the service that he was getting from his own bookkeeper. So I stumbled into this world, helping out a friend on the side, discovered the whole world of cloud accounting. And I was in Kansas City, he was in Nashville, and it made me think about, oh my gosh, I could have a market everywhere. So did it as a side hustle for 5 years. And then, a little over 2 years ago, started my firm, AgencyFi. And here we are. I'm still paying my mortgage. My wife is staying at home. I've got a little team under me. So yeah, generally things have gone well.
All the success metrics that matter, right?
Right.
So tell me about, I want to dig into this because I love niche down businesses. I own a couple. So like I am very much, I love how specific your sort of tagline there was as far as like, we work with agencies and creative agencies between 1 and 10 million in revenue. It's like, as soon as you say that, Paul, I'm like in my head, okay, if anyone in that space asks me who's a CFO that they might work with, you're going to come to mind because it's such a specific niche that you just mentioned. But let me ask you why that niche, because that also seems like we're kind of crappy customers. We're like really small. We're price sensitive. Like I'm including myself. Yes, I own it because I get it. Like, again, I run an agency and we've tried to work with small businesses. We're just inherently harder, you know? So tell me more about that. Like, is it just a personal mission and calling? Have you found a way to do this effectively and like at a good margin? Like why stay with that kind of really small business niche?
Yeah, I would like to say that it was like this great mission that I could expound upon. It's really not the case. Like I said, my friend had started an agency and that's how I kind of got my footing in this space. Really what I have found is that agencies at their core are simple businesses, right? People are leveraging other people's time and selling it for money. However, what I have found in order to be successful on the advising side, when it comes to the finance space, you have to have good data. And if you are working like with an e-commerce company or some more complex business model that generally includes inventory, it can be very difficult as a fractional service provider to get the accounting right. And I'm sure there are plenty of businesses out there that have found a way to crack the code there. I wasn't able to. Early on in this venture, I heard someone say there's like 120,000 agencies in the US, and I can count my direct competitors with my same positioning on one hand. There's less than 5 of us that I can name. I was like, wow, like we could all collaborate and share best practices and share what we're learning. And there'll always be basically an infinite market for us.
Yeah.
And so,
no, that's I think that's like such a good fundamental thing. It's it's a big market, and B, you already had a like proof point of working with that market. And I'm imagining C, you had some access to that market. You knew how you'd get in front of more people like that, right?
Correct. Yeah. And I actually, after working for my buddy on the side, I left Deloitte and went and worked for one of these firms. It's actually now one of my direct competitors, and kind of learned the ropes of how to productize and deliver the service that I'm in now, specifically for agencies. And so I got good exposure to the pain points in the areas that agencies struggle with beyond just like the finances, right? Like when you develop a niche, you can speak to the issues that kind of transcend the numbers more on the operational side. And because I haven't had an issue so far finding business, there's been no reason to expand my market. The thought has crossed my mind, but
well, you say you actually bring up a really interesting point about any service that works towards a really small businesses or is aimed at really small businesses, but I would imagine especially finance related services, you touch every part of the business. So in other words, I'm presuming you mostly get engaged directly with founders or CEOs, people who are pretty high up, and when they come and they look at their numbers every month with you or every couple of weeks and they're talking about their business, they're going to start to tell you like operational problems, sales problems, accounting problems, like efficiency problems. All those things get brought up, I imagine, right? So you end up being pretty, again, even though your focus is finance, you're going to touch on all these little sub parts of that too, right?
Yeah, I mean the numbers impact everything, right? Like, I always like anytime I start working with a customer, I make it a point to like express sincere gratitude for them picking me because it requires a high level of trust to let people into your books, into your numbers, because you see everything. You see the owner's spending habits. I could go on and on and on, but that requires like a certain level of vulnerability and discomfort that might not meet the naked eye, like when it comes to engaging with a finance person. But it's the reality. And as an advisor, you're going to be expected to speak to that, and they know that you see that. So, a lot of people in agencies, they'll work with coaches, but sometimes coaches don't have the full context. And now that I've been in this business for going on 7 years, when you see the numbers, you can get the full context very quickly. Like it's pretty easy to put a story together, looking at the numbers. And so, yeah.
No, that's great. So you mentioned the high trust level. I think this is one of the big challenges for any high trust business. And a lot of agencies are high trust businesses. I mean, it's part of the reason I call this podcast Retain Trust, is like we're all focused on retaining trust with our clients. So how have you been able to grow though? Like what are the levers you've been able to use? Obviously the first client is a personal network thing, right? That's basically how it is for everybody almost. What else has worked for you as far as growth? Has it just all been referrals? Have you started to build some intentional channels? What's doing it?
Yeah. So I will caveat this with I am not, a huge business. We'll do a little under $500,000 in revenue this year. I've got a team of going on 3 people, not including myself. I would say though, content marketing, like I think you mentioned this before we recorded, I'm decently active on LinkedIn. Before I started full time, a buddy of mine who ran a business, similar B2B service provider, told me to start tweeting. So I started tweeting back in February 2022. I gained a couple customers from my Twitter following. I've got about 2,500 followers on there. And then there is a pretty active agency community that has about 1,500 agencies in it. And I joined that community 4 or 5 months before I launched full time and just started answering people's questions in there, building relationships. No hard pitching, no soft pitching, really. Just, hey, yeah, I can answer this question. And from that, I was able to to land a few customers. From my original customer, I've gotten 2 referrals, but the rest have primarily been from content marketing. Yep.
That's funny. That's how it was for me too. And I part of it is you do what your strengths are, right? I imagine, and we didn't talk about this before, but I imagine because you're so active on LinkedIn that you probably are the kind of guy who likes to write little quippy things or tell stories, and that's probably like why that medium appeals to you. At least that's, again, this is kind of personal. This is how it was for me. So it's like leaning into your strengths as a founder. Like if you're the kind of person who likes to write quippy little stories, go be on social media because that's where those kind of move quickly. If you're the kind of person who likes to record YouTube videos or podcasts, like go do that thing. If you're the kind of person who likes to go to live events, probably go do that thing, and like any of these channels can work, but you don't want to go do something that is like, I don't know, pushing a boulder up a hill for you. If you just absolutely hate it, don't force yourself to do it because you'll get burned out, right?
Yeah, totally. And when I started tweeting, I had just had surgery. And so I was hung up in bed for 3 days. And that's when I got on Twitter. I was like, you know what? I'm going to just start firing off random quippy things that I know about agency finance. It was back kind of when threads were a big deal. I think before Elon bought Twitter, a couple of them went kind of big. I was like, oh, wow, this is like really interesting. To me, this is like kind of basic knowledge, and people are sending me DMs. I was like, oh, wow, this is so fascinating. And so, in addition to the engagement that I got, it is just a good place to flesh out your own thinking. Like, particularly on Twitter, having to distill your thoughts into 180 characters or whatever it is requires you to get very crystal clear on what thought you're trying to put out into the world. And I found that as kind of a fun brain exercise. That as a byproduct has led to some business for sure.
Totally. Yeah, same. You mentioned on your LinkedIn, I'm going to call you on something because I hope this isn't too confrontational. You mentioned on LinkedIn, you've never had a customer churn. I question if that's a good thing. And I know you're not that far, like you haven't been running this business 10 years, but I'm just going to like say, like, I think, and you actually have another thing in LinkedIn we'll talk about in a minute, like raising prices is really important. I wonder if, again, like maybe that's not always a good thing. I don't know, talk about it. Like, give me your perspective on it. Cause you say that on LinkedIn publicly. So I'm not saying anything secret here.
It is true. Gosh, going a little over 2 years full time, I haven't had a client churn. What I will say, Karl, that is not, caveated when I put that out there is I have fired clients. Okay.
Yeah. Okay. That's probably good.
Yeah. There have certainly been situations where I didn't think that the agency was getting the value out that they were paying for, which led to tension and inconvenience in the relationships. And so I decided to let them go, which I think ended up being a good thing for all sides. So, to date, I've chosen to have a lifestyle business without much enterprise value, meaning like I kind of know what's going on. I'm doing a fair bit of the delivery. I'm earning a lot of the margin that's in the business. And so I oversee quality control, right? And as a founder, you're going to have the highest standards. But I think too, like, the good part of that is I have been pretty tight with my positioning, right? Like I'm very strict about like, hey, you've got to be doing $1 million a year at revenue to fit my budget and to make sense for working with AgencyFi. There's enough of a market, and I stayed small enough to where that's been the case. So yeah, there will come a day, who knows, it could happen today, where I'll lose a client that lets me go and I'll have to take that down. But I have found, to your point about retain trust, because it's true, like it makes sales process a little bit more efficient. With new prospects. Yep.
Yeah. I think, again, I'm not really being combative or saying that is absolutely wrong. I think you bring up some good points. Is like a business that has a very specific type of client that they service, and they're very intentional about saying yes to only those, is much less likely to churn people than one that is very broad in what they say yes to. I would think, which probably is part of the reason you've been able to pull that off. And then you're right. Part of the reason is you're intentionally keeping this relatively small, like controllable, a thing you can have direct influence on. Because I can just tell you, my personal experience has been there, like as each of our businesses have grown, there's things I've handed off to employees. And of course, some things they let slip through the cracks at some points, right? And we lost clients that maybe I would have kept personally, maybe I would have found a way to make it work or whatever. But at the same time, like in the service of growing beyond just me, I thought it was a worthwhile trade-off, right? And there's pros and cons, and we could argue, there's no right answer to this question. But I think it is an interesting thing to think about. It's like the relationship to churn and growth and being intentional with who your customer pick, like choices are. It's like, it's a just an interesting dichotomy there.
It is really funny you bring this up. I've gone back and forth. I go back and forth every week about whether I should keep that up, because it is kind of like has a weird, like a little bit of a slimy markety feel, but it is true.
Yeah. Well, if it's true, it's true.
Some efficiencies in the sales process. So
in all seriousness, though, this is one of the challenging parts about the dance of doing social media marketing and LinkedIn. It's like you're trying to kind of humbly brag, but you don't want to come off as a total douche. And so like I think that level of I haven't churned a client yet. I don't think that's bad. I'm just saying I've seen things on LinkedIn where I'm like, oh God, like grown, like I've never worked with this person. But like maybe it works for attracting the right kind of client for them. I don't know.
I almost wish I would have one churn so I could just take it down and not have to do this dance, and then realize like, hey, if you turn a client, it's okay. Life goes on.
Well, okay. So this is fun. I didn't mean to get on too much of a tangent there, but let's get into some finance stuff. Because again, I really am actively learning about this. One of the, I give you a little context. Like I've gotten to look at, a couple dozen businesses, finances from the doing an acquisition and going through trying to do more acquisitions. And so the fun thing about that is you see a lot of agencies and you get to see some books on them. And I realized from doing that, sometimes things about my company that weren't so good. And then sometimes things that were like, oh, yeah, okay, I'm doing okay. And so I imagine you get some similar insights and even to a greater extent because you're looking at really in-depth numbers with your clients and prospects. So let's talk basics. When customers come to you, do they typically already have a handle? They're at $1 million in revenue. They typically have a handle on the very basic things of like revenue, gross margin, net margin, or are you starting at zero and they're just like, we barely have books together?
Yeah, I would love to say, Karl, that 9 times out of 10, um, the agencies that come to me have a basic grasp on things. 9 times out of 10, that's not the case. uh, Generally, when I say that, they don't understand primarily what their gross margin is, meaning what it costs to deliver their service, and then what their like net or operating margin is, what they make at the end of the day. And the game of an agency is to deliver your service efficiently enough to make enough margin at the end of the day. And 9 times out of 10, agencies tend to be pretty inefficient in their delivery, which is usually why they're coming to me. So I think like starting there, like, the 80/20 of like getting good financial data is just knowing how to structure your P&L. It would be crazy, right, if you ran like an e-commerce business and you didn't know what your inventory costs were and what your people costs were, like your overhead, right? But you've got to do that like within your agency to understand like, hey, do we have enough money to like invest in sales and marketing? Oh, we have like actually really inefficient delivery margins. We should fix that before like trying to grow, or we're going to grow into a roll-up.
Let's talk about gross margins real quick. So for those of you who are listening, maybe new to starting a business, maybe define that term gross margin first, and then talk about some benchmark numbers. Like maybe that's different by different kinds of agency, but just roughly speaking, what should I be shooting for?
Yeah, so gross margin is like the fancy accountant term. By gross margin, what I really mean is delivery margin, right? So if you are going to hire a designer to design a website for your client, that person would be considered a delivery person, right? On the flip side, if you're going to hire like a director of growth, they're not doing client work, they're going out and trying to land new business for you. They are a non-delivery person, right? So generally, I'm going to give you two different delivery margins. One is going to be like the overall P&L, right? If you're looking at your P&L at the end of the year, what you want your delivery margin to be. And then I'm going to give you like a project or client-specific delivery margin, okay? So if you're scoping a project, say you're going to go out and bid on building a new website for a client, say the client wants to pay you $100,000, you generally at the project level don't want to be spending more than like 30, maybe 35 grand in delivery costs on that website build. So that would be like a 65 to 70% delivery margin at the project level, right? Obviously, your delivery people cannot be 100% utilized, but all of their unutilized time, their admin time, the PTO, all the things that you have to pay for that don't go to a specific client, that's also going to show up on your P&L delivery costs. So overall, right, you want your delivery margin to be about 50%. So, if you make 100 grand, you don't want to spend more than 50 grand for the whole year on delivery costs.
One thing I've seen different businesses handle differently when it comes to gross margin, I want to ask your opinion on this, is managers and especially delivery managers. So again, as an agency scales, I start to hire a delivery manager who then has delivery tacticians. I'm going to call them, I'm generalizing these titles here, but like, whatever that person's title is, maybe it's a operations director or something. And then they're in charge of overseeing, let's take that graphic designer. You have kind of your, manager of the designers who kind of oversees making sure new designers get onboarded and get to know your processes, and also is in charge of maybe they have some project management oversight. Maybe it's a little messy as it is in small business, right? And then you've got your frontline designers that actually deliver the work. And then, again, maybe it somehow like you've got backups, and that delivery manager deals with when somebody's out, who covers the backups and stuff. So where do you put that delivery manager? Are they like a delivery cost, or are they kind of over here in your other expenses that, are operational expenses or whatever?
Like your non-production costs. Yeah. I generally put delivery managers within delivery costs, right? My rule of thumb, if you spend 30% or more of your time in delivery, which is kind of what like billable delivery, which is kind of where a manager generally falls, right? Just speaking very high level. And your intention in the business is to serve customers, then I would put you in delivery costs. Other finance people might argue with me on that and like, well, we need to allocate part of their time to delivery, part of it to admin. I can see where like, hey, maybe a person is 50% delivery, 50% like sales and marketing. Like I would split their time. But if their sole focus is delivery and overseeing delivery, I like to just put it in delivery costs.
Yeah, it's interesting, and it's one of these. I find it challenging too, because what can happen, I've noticed, is so again, you're growing a small business. Initially, it's the owner and say 5 freelancers, and then all of a sudden you realize I need a manager to oversee these freelancers, so I can, as the owner, focus on sales, let's say. So now your P&L goes from 5 delivery people who are on the in that gross costs or whatever, the delivery costs, to all of a sudden 5. Yeah, your margins look great, right? You might be at like 70% gross margins or something cool. And then you bring in this manager who's kind of expensive, or you promote somebody up to a manager. They're more expensive, and they don't actually have as much time spent delivering work to clients. So they actually are a drag on this team from a financial perspective. But your numbers look worse all of a sudden. But as an owner, you freed up time to go focus on sales and marketing. Again, there's no answer to this problem, but I wonder how you talk about that with clients, because when you look at that gross margin number, all of a sudden it takes a big hit because you hired this manager. Everybody's got to be like, oh shit, did something go wrong? Like, are we okay? Like, is this supposed to happen? Like, what do we do, Paul?
Yeah, no, and I'm so glad you brought this up, Karl, because it's a conversation I've been having with a couple clients as of late. I think agency owners, similar to myself, need to be make an intentional decision around, hey, do I want to have a lifestyle business where I make a 50% margin and I get all this cash flow and I'm earning all this income and I can't sell it, but it's like a great income for my family and I can kind of take off when I want to? Or do I want to grow an actual business that can run while I sleep? And if you want the latter, you are going to have to make the sacrifice of less operating leverage, like less margin in the short run, to grow an actual sustainable business in the long run. And what I see happen is that, agency owners wake up one day, they're a $2.5-3 million business. They've got 13 people. They've got no clear, customer avatar, and they are living in hell.
Yeah. They're the only manager, so they're the only person who's like overseeing every project. Yep, totally.
Because they think as my top line grows, so should my own personal bank account. And that's not how you sustainably grow a people business. And I think there can be a disconnect there. Like, hey, I'm growing revenue, so my bank account should be growing. It's like, no, you're growing a service business, and this needs to be an intentional decision.
So that's a really good point. I say this the same thing all the time, and people are talking about, especially there's some pivot points here where agency owners get hung up and get really afraid to cut their own margins because they think these things are, well, they're just not, they don't want to do that, right? So for example, I was talking to an agency owner recently who's like working a ton of hours. Of course, he's the only one who brings in new business, the only one who closes deals with clients. He still has a little bit of a hand in like production oversight, or at least like project management and client relationships. And I'm like, and he's making great margins. He's making 50-60%, like I think net margins. So he's like amazing, right? And he's like, but I'm working all the time. And I'm like, well, yeah, you are. You're the only one who does new business like development and closing deals, like, of course you're working all the time. That's a full-time job. You need to hire somebody for it. And he's like, well, yeah, but that person costs 200 grand. That's like half my money that I'm taking home every month. And I'm like, well, yeah, that's the way it works. Like, where this is with a trade-off you got to make. Like, you don't get time and more money for free. Like, at some point, and there are things we can talk about other things you can do, but I don't know. Is that it sounds like that's a conversation you often are having, is something like that with agency owners who are struggling to make that choice?
Yeah. Like, for example, I have a client of mine right now. For the last 6 months, they've been around 50% net margins. It's an 8-person shop run by husband and wife. So those 8 people include the husband and wife. And when I first started working with them, it's been like a year and a half, they were looking to exit the business and no one wanted to buy them.
No, nobody's buying it. 50% net margin is scary. Yeah, it means it means the owners are doing everything to me.
Exactly. And so we have been in this place for the last 6 months where they're earning this great margin. And it's like, okay, guys, we wanted to sell 18 months ago. Like, the next thing to do if you want to make this a sellable business is to hire an operator. And I think over time they're coming to the realization that, like, you know what? We have a great team. We've got a really great client roster. We've got good dialed in processes. Our kids are at a good age where they're pretty independent. We're going to lifestyle the heck out of this thing and make good money. And we're not concerned about
no exit
selling this right now.
Yeah.
But they're content with that, right? They had to realize that. They had to come to that decision on their own. So
right, exactly. Get very clear with what you want, and then look at what I like to think about is looking at comps or talking to business owners who have been through that journey and talking to them about what their numbers look like at different stages. And again, like, we're kind of, when you are that solo founder plus a few freelancers, your numbers just fundamentally look very different from once you become I'll call it a real agency, where you've got the owners a little more worked out of the day to day, and you've got like real managers and a salesperson and things like that. Like, all the numbers may percentage wise look worse as far as your take home, but they can be much larger businesses than the solo owner and 3 freelancers or whatever. But there's no right and wrong. Again, like, I'm not judging either way. I think it's just what you want to do and be clear with it.
yeah. And I think too, once you make that decision, I think the biggest thing an agency owner can do for themselves is limit lifestyle creep. Like, hey, if you want to grow a business, like, limit your pay to whatever you need for your family to survive. Like, it doesn't have to be, you're just paying for the bare basics, but limit your salary to what you need to survive on somewhat comfortably, and then don't go above and beyond that, right? Invest the residual cash flow into the business. Otherwise, it's a tough hedonic treadmill to get off of. Speaking from a little bit of personal experience here. So
yeah. I think we've all been there. This is really good. I was going to ask more about some of these trade-offs that business owners make. And this was kind of one of them. And so we've already talked about the trade-off of, like, should I hire? Should I do the work myself? Do I want to cut my own margins to hire people to get out of it? That's a question, but it's a trade-off. And you probably talk about clients with that. There's also things like, and I imagine you talk with clients about these things too, like internal hires or internal promotions versus outside hires for management roles or leadership roles. Like, how do I make that decision? How do I finance that? Like that, maybe selling your business versus maintaining it forever and then just like saving as much cash as you can, or it's giving it to an employee or doing some kind of ESOP plan or whatever. This stuff's a little more advanced, but like, how do you get people thinking about these things and talking through, or like figuring out the path that's right for them?
Yeah, the first thing I look at is the ownership structure, right? So if you're a solo founder, you have a little bit more wiggle room to play with to bring on like another partner, which I've seen work out well. If you are needing to hire someone to take yourself out of, delivery, or like run sales and marketing, obviously you can hire like a W-2 to do that. But sometimes if you want to get someone who's going to stick around and have a really vested interest in your business, you need to give up some equity to do that. If you are running a agency with a partner, I always give a word of caution to bringing on like a third partner. In service businesses, your primary expense is people, and there is only so much like cheddar that can go around. So I haven't seen it work well. Again, like my vantage point is somewhat limited, but in a 3 partnership model, unless you are of like some decent size scale, call it 5 to 10 million in revenue, it's going to be tough to have 3 partners in the business. So that's generally where I'm providing my input. I'm not as much at like the management layer, more so like, hey, do I need to bring on another partner to run this part of the business? I have a client right now who's thinking about bringing on a third partner. And, after weighing through some of these things, they've decided, what, we're going to go the phantom equity route. We're going to give this person profit sharing, but we're not going to actually give up control of the business to solve this growth problem that we're running into.
I'm glad you brought this up. I've never talked about this on the podcast. This is a great topic that I've often comes up in conversations with owners because they don't know let's talk about equity, phantom equity, and partnerships, and all those kinds of alternative compensations, let's call it, for agencies. Maybe you give me the overview, and then I probably have some color commentary too.
So phantom equity is a fancy way of saying someone gets the rewards of the business performance without actually having an ownership stake in the business. Oftentimes what that looks like is profit sharing at the end of each year or quarter, and then some slice of the pie if you ever like sell the business. But they don't get voting control. They don't get to make big decisions that you and maybe another partner get to make. So it's a way to retain control of the business without going through the pain of changing up your operating agreement.
I'll also just throw in there, because this is really important for the employee to keep in mind, they also are not on the ownership table. So from a tax perspective, they don't have to pay tax on the business's profits like a real owner does. And so this can be a pretty important thing. If you bring somebody on and give them real equity, real ownership stake, they are responsible for paying taxes on the percentage of profits, even if they never see the actual cash flow, because depending on how you're doing distributions, that may or may not happen. So anyway, there's something, it becomes taxably a bigger deal if you go for true equity versus phantom equity, much simpler because it's just a contract.
I don't know if we want to get into like how taxation works and in service businesses. It's a great point.
Probably a whole nother episode, but
yeah,
yeah,
for sure.
Yeah. It is just also, again, like the control thing is important too. Just as an owner, if someone has been a good employee and you want to reward them, phantom stock is a safe way to give them that reward without immediately giving away a piece of your company. There are ways to do it in with equity where you could give them shares that were non-voting, but you'd have to restructure possibly, and that can be expensive and have tax repercussions too. So all these things are not advice, as always. This is not tax advice. This is not legal advice. Go talk to lawyers and tax accountants if you really want to get there. But I will say, just anecdotally, from my own personal experience, phantom stock, a much easier way for me to go in if I want to offer some kind of upside for the long term for employees, rather than getting them as real owners.
And to my point earlier about like seeing under the hood of some of these businesses, like, if you're running an agency, you're probably buying a company car and you're running certain things through the business that you are going to have the tough conversation of a new partner of like, hey, let's talk about some of these more discretionary items that you might not want to change up, which is totally fine. In which case, the phantom equity route is certainly more so the way to go.
Something you said on the LinkedIn post is like one of my A1 priorities for agencies. And so I'm glad you said it, raise prices. And it's, okay. So again, like context here, I'm looking at agencies to buy mostly in a similar range as your clients. So like these relatively small agencies, and often one of the challenge or problems I see in them just from the outside is they have clients who have been around for 3, 5, 7 years that have never had a price raise. And look, inflation alone should justify a moderate price range every year. But in all honesty, like a lot of companies intentionally growing, I think should be raising prices intentionally to push themselves up market or to make sure that they are working with the best, like least price sensitive clients. Again, not a blanket rule, not every single time. I know there's different markets are different, whatever. But give me your thoughts on that? Because it sounds like you've had similar experiences.
The easiest way to make more money in any business is not to sell more, it's to charge more, right? And so the way I generally tend to think about price increases is one, to your point earlier, Karl, like inflation, like it's always going to be there. We know that was like the story of this past election cycle. It has been a great time to raise prices because people expect it, right? Prices have been going up across the board, especially labor costs over the last 24 months. So I have seen like kind of the standard rate in an agency, if I was to peg one, go from like kind of 150 an hour up to like closer to 200, like in most cases. There's some that are certainly above and beyond that. So that's one, just like as a function of where the market has gone, all service quality and where you're positioned on the market aside, like people have expected it. Two, like if you want to like dive into the data, I think a lot of people or agency owners don't understand what their average cost per hour is. I was actually doing a little like meta study on my own client base recently, and across my entire agency base, the average cost of a US based employee fully loaded with benefits and payroll taxes was about 100 grand a year, or like $50 an hour. I was like, oh my God. Like the average employee costs 100 grand a year now if they're US based. So generally, if you can take what your average cost per hour is, you should be trying to charge 3.5 to 4 times that. And then last but not least, if you have high retention, then that is a leading indicator that you are well positioned to raise your prices. Obviously, if you have high churn and your ICP or your customer profile is exposed to a downturn, you might not have as much leverage to raise prices. But if you have pretty decent retention, then that should be a call to action for you to raise your price. Yeah, I think I talked about it in my LinkedIn post. I was doing a rate review for a client recently. They hadn't raised their prices with one client in 7 years. Part of the reason they hadn't done that is because the margin on that client was so strong.
Was still good, yeah.
But part of it was like they were just afraid, like, hey, what if they churn off? And when they eventually did it, they're like, oh my God, I've been waiting for this forever. I love your service. I'm happy to pay more for you. So part of it is just getting over the psychological fear.
I think that's 100. I mean, not 100% of it. There's obviously some math part of it too, but I think for the small business owners I've talked to, that is at least 75% of the battle is just the fear that if I raise prices on these clients that I've had for so long, they're immediately going to leave. Here's a couple things I'll say about that. One is clients are just as afraid of you if you're a good, leaving, if you're a good service provider as you are of them leaving. Because I've been in the client shoes.
I've never thought about that.
My best service providers, like the companies that I freaking love work with, I bring them into every company that I bring them into companies I buy. I tell my friends about them. I really hope they never leave me. Like they don't outgrow me. They don't become like too big for my little needs or whatever. So I feel that, but again, as an agency, I know our best clients think that about us. They're like, oh God, I don't know how you guys could do this. Like I couldn't do this without you. Like, please, they've worked hard to find you in a lot of cases. Maybe not across the board, but again, it is work too. The other thing to think about is like, especially if you're servicing larger companies, or really this applies across the board. Look, if I'm a small business owner and the agency I've been working with for 10 years is like raising prices by a marginal amount, 5 or 10% or whatever, that is reasonable and expected, and they give me enough notice, would I rather do that and pay that and continue to be happy with the service, or take the shot that I go have to find a competitor? Are they as good? Do I like them as much? Do we have to build communication rapport? How much time do I have to spend actually finding a competitor? Like all these are costs, and these are costs that are not insignificant. And so there is resistance to change for your clients as well. Again, especially if you're doing good work. But so anyway, just to bolster your point here, a lot of people are afraid of it, but it is really in my opinion, like kind of unjustified. And then the other thing I'll say, I don't want to talk too much, but I will say this was really helpful. We went through this exercise of raising prices. We've always done it consistently. And you don't have to do it all at once and immediately is the other thing. So like take a small subset of your clients. So your most annoying, hardest to service client, your lowest margin clients, or whatever you want to take there, and go say to them, we're going to raise prices in 3 months. Here's the timeline. And then, so you've now like, just see how they react. Like, do they all leave you? Okay, well, maybe you can't raise prices across the board. Like, you now know that there's sensitivity here. On the other hand, if they all say, we're coming along for the ride, and that's fine, just whatever you got to do. Great. Now you've improved your margins on your worst clients anyway. That's like a win-win, even if you do nothing else, right? So there's ways to do this in pieces that make it less scary and like help you build confidence. And then the other thing we've done actively is we will raise prices, but we will give our clients an out. So we'll exchange something. For example, if we are going to raise prices across the board, but if you want a 5% discount to kind of get you back to your existing prices that'll last for 6 months, do a case study with us. Do a, co-promote something for us. Go sign a 2-year agreement or something. There's lots of ways to kind of like mitigate this and make it less of a, like soften the blow essentially.
Or you can reduce scope. Like that's an effective tactic that I've seen as well. Like, hey, we can keep the price the same. What if we cut X, Y, or Z? You're not using it much anyway. It's the least beneficial thing we do. So like, how does that sound? You probably don't want to be doing that with that deliverable, that service or whatever it is, and they're not benefiting much from it. So yeah, there's levers to pull for sure.
Yeah, love it. Okay, the other thing I wanted to ask you about, because I've never heard this metric before, and I feel like, again, I'm not a pro. I've only been running agencies for 4 years, but I've looked at a lot of P&Ls. I've talked a lot about metrics. I love
Who
data.
knows? I might have made it up. I'm curious about.
Yeah, you made it. Maybe this is a Paul Seaton original, which is cool too. But this is fulfillment role ratio. I didn't Google it, so I just used your LinkedIn post again to pull this out. But it is for every what you said was for every 4 delivery focused roles, there should be kind of 1 non-delivery focused role. So talk to me more about that fulfillment role ratio, where that comes from, and some of the benchmarks around it, maybe.
A synonym you might throw in there is like this, like owner's sanity ratio. I think you mentioned earlier, we were talking about like, hey, you might wake up one day and you have 10 people that you're overseeing and you're doing everything, you're doing sales and marketing, and you're still kind of in delivery and you're making a lot of money, but you're absolutely miserable. I think most agency owners tend to be kind of accidental agency owners, right? They're usually some sort of technician. They're one that's doing the work, and then demand grows. They have to build a team, but they forget to build a business, right? So they have to hire and become a leader of leaders, right? So what I mean by that, if you are thinking about building a team, generally what works is you want to have 4, maybe 5, some like individual contributors for someone who's like a manager or something, just to maintain your sanity. I have seen people that abide by that law tend to scale a business a little bit easier than those who just hire a bunch of people just to do delivery work and you're overseeing all of them. Again, this is a metric that I kind of made up, but as I've looked at org charts and worked with several agencies, it's kind of a trend that I've seen. So
the mistake is having too few people on non-fulfillment roles. So in other words, hiring lots of fulfillers who are like, again, let's go to our graphic designers, lots of individual freelance graphic designers that help the owner out, but then just one owner who's doing all the non-fulfillment roles. So there's like, an 8-to-1 would mean there's 8 little graphic designers for every one person doing sales who's the owner. And that's probably too high a ratio. You need to like go hire a salesperson essentially.
Yes. Yeah. And generally what that looks like for a small agency is you're going to like hire like a head of delivery, right? To pull yourself out of delivery. And then once you get to like 12, maybe 15 people, you hire some person to help out with sales. That's generally what it's going to look like if we're going to go like chronologically.
I would agree. I think that's probably the safest, easiest way to do it. And I think, unfortunately, a lot of agency owners try to hire sales first because they don't like to do that part, right? Like again, you said this, like they're tacticians who all of a sudden are like, they're really good designers, and all of a sudden they're running a design shop, and now most of their role is sales and onboarding customers. And they go, oh, I just want to hire a salesperson. But very hard hire to make. I mean, in my opinion, way harder than a head of delivery.
Yes.
Yes. Yeah. And it can, there's lots of things. We didn't even get into productization. Productizing your agency can certainly make it easier to hire those sales roles because it can kind of confine your services more, but it is still such a nuanced role that even if you're highly productized and successful, it's still really hard. So
yeah. And agencies, like, this, Karl, like they're such a relationship driven business, right? And if people have a relationship with the founder or owner, it's going to be much easier to close deals than, some $70K a year SDR that you hired. Not that those people don't have their place or can't be effective, but given the nature of agency work, that's where the founder is ultimately going to find themselves until they grow to a certain level.
Yeah. And then one thing I will say, though, that you can do early on if you really hate sales, which I get, is you can hire some kind of assistant to help you with all the grunt side of sales. What I mean is the follow-up emails, the getting proposals put together, the just, keeping your calendar clear and like, what all that stuff. You can even hire people to do more of the lead gen stuff, like sending cold outreach or helping with marketing tasks and things. But you really like getting yourself out of the sales calls themselves and the like closing the deals is hard. And again, it's not that you can't do it. I mean, I'm out of that in both my businesses right now, but it's not always smooth. And I know there, like, you always just take this hit. You know that the salesperson you're bringing in is going to close at a lower rate than you as the owner did, and they're gonna like lose deals you would have won. It's going to be hard to stomach that for a bit. So just a lot of things to prepare yourself for mentally before you get there.
Totally agree. I think I'm learning more from you, Karl, than you've learned from me. So thanks for all your.
No, I apologize. My rants and raves. I can't. But these are really like important topics, and again, they all relate to finance, and like the numbers should guide you in a way. This is why I love these ratios you're coming up with. Where to me that could be. I mean, you could probably put. Do you have these all listed out like on a like? It'd be cool to have like a resource where you can see like here's some common ratios, common numbers that you see in agencies of this size, and like what people can kind of benchmark themselves out.
No, I should put together a one pager. Like I have all these things in my head. Maybe I could like develop a little lead magnet after.
Yeah, totally. Let's get your marketing together. No, I mean, I would love that personally. I would be super interested in that. That's something that, it would be cool to collaborate on or figure out a way to put that together for people, because I would find it interesting, and I'm sure a lot of people I talk to would find it useful too. Okay, let's kind of start wrapping up here. I love to talk books because I'm a fairly avid reader, although I have 2 young kids, so I don't read nearly as much as I used to. But anything you've read in the last couple of years that helped you on your entrepreneurial journey or has maybe helped you just understand small business better?
This answer like really might get me canceled because this individual is like the hot internet smelly think boy these days, but I have really benefited a lot from Alex Hermosi.
Okay, yeah.
I think some of the stuff around like how much effort is required to actually grow a business is just, it has been paradigm shifting for me. This whole notion of like, if you don't quit, like you cannot lose, right? Like I think you talked about that earlier. Like a lot of running a small business is just doing the basics well, being consistent, doing what you say you're going to do. And, he talks a lot about a lot of different tactics, but like the thread between all of what he's saying is like, you have to do a lot of volume and do it well and do it consistently. And that has just like really resonated with me, because if I've learned anything in business is that there is no silver bullet, and it's the boring answer. And it's just like, it's the honest truth.
I love that. Yep. Yeah. And Alex Hormozi I agree. He's a little broy, and I could see him being off-putting for a lot of people. I don't recommend him to many people, but I do occasionally listen to his stuff because exactly what you said, like I hear that common thread is it's about consistently working hard and like just like focusing on like growth, or at least like in continuing to build like pipeline just over and over for years. It's not, he doesn't give you shortcuts and hacks and says it's all about like, this, if you do this quick thing, you'll grow your business. Like it's never that. It's like, it's just hard work over time. And I think that's just true.
He's like
there's no way around that.
He's like, marketers can get a bad rap sometimes, but he's just so damn honest.
Yeah.
And
I
love it because it's resonated true with my experience. Yeah.
Totally. Yeah. Okay. And then, what's something you're learning about these days, beyond whatever Alex Hormozi talks about, but like anything you're actively kind of working to get better at? So
I was training for a marathon, actually. That was like kind of a personal endeavor that I was working on. My best friend and my brother have both qualified for the Boston Marathon. And so, I was a athlete in high school. I've always been fairly active. but long distance running has been something that I've never been very good at. And so I did sustain an injury somewhat recently, but the goal is to eventually compete in Boston over the next couple years. So as like a personal endeavor, that's something I'm like focused on kind of outside of work right now.
I love
Yeah.
it, man. Are you gonna go to Boston this year?
So my brother and my best friend are running in 2026. So I'm going to definitely
Oh,
go out and watch
26.
it.
Okay. All right, cool. Yeah, my brother-in-law is doing Boston this year, and I think we'll probably try to go up and watch it. Just I've never watched it either, and that would be a cool one to see. Yeah, I did one marathon very slowly several years ago, and ever since I have been perpetually getting injured if I get over like a certain number of miles a week. So I'm trying to figure out where my body, like where the weak point is to like get over that hump. But man, it's brutal. This is the hard part about getting older. You can't just go out there and run 12 miles at like without repercussions.
I know. And I would say like running has just been kind of therapeutic for me. I mean, I run a small business. I've got 3 kids under the age of 6. And so you get such like clear thoughts when you're just like running without your headphones and it's just you and the road in front of you. So I have found that to be cathartic. I've also kind of undertaken woodworking recently. As a laptop warrior, someone who works on a computer all day and on Zoom calls, I have found that I need to do something with my hands. And so that was actually at the top of my Elfster list was a book on woodworking. We recently moved into a new house and the previous owner left an actual woodworking shop. And so I've got this space. So to my wife's delight, I recently finished my first project, which was a bench for our kitchen. I learned all about pocket holes and making a cut list and all that sort of stuff. So that's been like a total dad thing I've been working on lately as well.
Yeah, that is such a dad hobby. There's probably like something innate in humans as a father. You start to like say, I should be able to create things with my hands.
100%. Yes. Oh my gosh. Yeah. And it's an older home too. So like I better get handy or my handyman tools are going to get
I think
big.
honestly, I'm a this is a whole nother topic we won't get into. I'm a anti purchaser of homes because I don't want to spend my time on home improvement and repairs and my mental energy on it, because everybody I know has bought a home. It's like, if you don't do it yourself, you're just going to spend a shitload of money on, keeping it going. So good for you for learning, because I think that's probably the only way to do it and make it a good investment.
Do you rent? Has that been your?
Yeah, so we've always rented, and part of it's we live in the city in Chicago, and we've lots of behind the scenes reasons. Honestly, though, even the financial reasons, I think what people underestimate in home ownership is the mental like sort of devotion you have to have to the property and keeping it up, and not just the money. Like, you can run the finances and it is on paper a good investment, but the time that it takes to manage it versus when you're a renter, hey, our refrigerator stopped working, call the landlord. It's like, that's their problem. Mentally, it is just free from, like, I do not have to worry about that problem. So I think that to me is where the mental freedom is. I'd rather focus on the small businesses than try to own a home. But I totally get for other people that security of feeling like they have their own space that is theirs, they could do what they want with, outweighs that. And so, it's a personal decision. It's not like a one size fits all.
I think Ramit Sethi from I Will Teach You to Be Rich, he's very big on this idea of like renting, like even if you do well financially. The mental cognitive load of owning a house. I have a note on my phone. It's like all the kind of honeydews that are just always going to be there to get done on the house. And it's just part of it. Yeah.
It is. And those like unexpected expenses too, that, all of a sudden, like your basement leaks and you got a $20,000 bill to pay. Like, again, not that can't be overcome, or that in the long run, those things cancel out to like being worth it versus the cost of renting. I just think like, if you're an entrepreneur, like, again, for me, I've got enough risky balls in the air that I don't want to throw one more in there at this stage, but personal decision.
It's easier too to own a home in Wichita, Kansas than maybe like Chicago, which I'm sure is much more expensive.
There could be some location. Yeah. Yeah, totally. It's, again, personal decision, but I think like one of those, I try to, buck the cultural norm. And so just because people say you're supposed to hit this certain age and supposed to buy a home, I'm like, no, I'm going to go try something else. Like, part of it's that, but
Also probably why you're an entrepreneur.
Yeah, exactly. Right. Yeah. Yeah. Because I'm supposed to go get a good job and keep that job and keep working up it. Yeah. Awesome. All right. Well, this is off topic now. So good time to wrap it up. Paul, how can people find out more about AgencyFi or you and follow up with you if they want to work with you?
Yeah, as Karl mentioned, I'm pretty active on Twitter and LinkedIn. You can find me on Twitter at agency_CFO. And then on LinkedIn, if you just search Paul Seaton, you'll see my face on there with a yellow background. I talk all about agency finances. You can also check out my website, AgencyFi.co.
Nice. Okay, cool. Well, we'll put some links in the show notes as well. Thanks so much, Paul. This has been a lot of fun. We'll have to do this again in the next couple of years and, just get a catch up on the business and maybe get deeper into some more finance stuff.
Yeah. We can have my therapy session when I finally have a client churn, which would be the next time we talk, I'm sure.
That's right. Yeah. When you raise prices and they all churn. Yeah. Yeah. Thanks, Paul. I appreciate it.
All right.
All right. Talk soon. Thank you for watching this episode of Retain Trust. If you like this one, give it a thumbs up and subscribe on YouTube. It takes 2 seconds and it helps others find out about the show. And if you have questions or suggestions for a future episode, leave a comment. See you next time.